Right now, there's a task sitting in the back of your mind. You know exactly what it is. You've opened the document, you've stared at the first line, and then somehow you found yourself refilling a water bottle that was already half full. You call this laziness, but the real answer is far stranger. Your brain is not being lazy. It is running a threat response that was built for a world that no longer exists. And once you see what's actually happening underneath, you'll never look at your own avoidance the same way again. Picture the moment just before you open that file you've been avoiding. Your chest tightens just slightly, your attention slides sideways toward your phone, toward the kitchen, toward anything that isn't the task. That shift feels like weakness. It isn't. It's a switch flipping in a part of your brain that has nothing to do with productivity at all. Dr. Tim Pychyl, a psychologist at Carleton University who has spent over 2 decades studying procrastination, found something surprising when he scanned what people actually feel in that moment. It isn't boredom. It's a spike of negative emotion tied directly to the task itself. Fear of failing, fear of not being good enough, sometimes just plain discomfort with no name at all. Your brain registers the task as a threat. And what does a brain do with a threat? It runs. For most of human history, running from a threat kept you alive. If you heard a rustle in tall grass, you didn't sit down and rationally weigh the odds of a predator being there. You moved. Immediately, the part of your brain responsible for that reaction, the amygdala, does not distinguish well between a lion in the grass and a looming deadline on a screen. Both register as danger. Both trigger the same impulse to escape. This is where the story gets stranger. Because escaping a lion and escaping an email are supposed to feel completely different, they don't. Not to the ancient wiring running underneath your conscious mind. Dr. Fuschia Sirois, a researcher who has spent years studying the emotional roots of procrastination, describes it as a form of mood repair. You are not avoiding the task. You are avoiding the feeling the task produces. Scrolling your phone for 4 minutes doesn't finish the project, but it does make the anxious feeling go away for 4 minutes. Your brain learns that lesson fast. Avoidance works in the short term, so it keeps reaching for the same lever again and again. Have you ever noticed that the task you avoid the longest is rarely the hardest one? It's usually the one that makes you feel the most exposed. This changes the entire question. It's not why are you so undisciplined, it's what feeling are you protecting yourself from. Go back further. And the picture gets even more interesting. Your ancestors did not live in a world that rewarded thinking about next month. If you were a forager 40,000 years ago, planning 6 weeks ahead didn't keep you fed. Finding food today did. Avoiding danger today did. Mating, bonding, defending territory, all of it happened in the present tense, because the present tense was the only tense that mattered for survival. Your brain evolved to weight the immediate over the distant. Dramatically, economists and psychologists call this hyperbolic discounting. A reward right now feels enormous. The exact same reward, promised for next week, feels almost weightless by comparison. This isn't a flaw in your character. It's a feature that kept small bands of humans alive on a savanna where distant plans rarely paid off, and the next hour often decided everything. Now take that ancient calculation and drop it into a world built entirely around distant deadlines. Retirement accounts, quarterly goals, a paper due in 3 weeks. Your brain was never designed to feel urgency about a future that far away, so it doesn't, not honestly, not until the deadline collapses into the present and suddenly becomes real enough to trigger that same ancient alarm. That's why so many people do their best work in the final 24 hours. It isn't because pressure makes them brilliant. It's because pressure is the only thing their ancient wiring recognizes as urgent enough to act on. There's an experiment that captures this tension almost perfectly, even though it wasn't originally designed to study procrastination at all. In the late 1960s, the psychologist Walter Mischel placed young children in a room with a single marshmallow. He told them they could eat it now, or wait a short while and receive 2. Some children waited, many did not. What Mischel was really measuring wasn't willpower in the abstract. It was how a mind negotiates between an immediate, certain reward and a delayed, uncertain one. Every time you choose your phone over your task, you are sitting in front of that same marshmallow at 40 years old with higher stakes and better excuses. Here is the counterintuitive twist, though. People who resisted longest in Mischel's experiment were rarely the ones gritting their teeth the hardest. They were the ones who found a way to change how the moment felt. They looked away. They imagined the marshmallow as a cloud instead of a food. They shifted the emotional weight of the moment rather than fighting it head-on. That single detail unravels almost everything people believe about procrastination. If it were really about laziness, the fix would be discipline. Push harder. Want it more, but if it's about emotion, the fix is completely different. You don't out-discipline a threat response. You have to change what the moment feels like before you can act inside it. Dr. Piers Steel, who conducted one of the largest meta-analyses ever done on procrastination research, found something that supports exactly this. Traits like impulsiveness and low confidence predicted procrastination far more reliably than laziness ever did. People who procrastinated most weren't people who valued achievement less. They were people whose nervous systems reacted more intensely to uncertainty, to ambiguity, to the fear of doing something imperfectly, which raises a question worth sitting with. What if the very people who care the most are sometimes the ones who freeze the longest? Think about the last time you avoided replying to a difficult message. It probably wasn't because the reply required effort. Typing 3 sentences takes seconds. It was because the message carried some emotional weight your brain didn't want to touch yet. The task was never really the task. The task was a container for a feeling you weren't ready to open. This reframes the entire idea of laziness as a moral failing. Laziness implies you don't care. But most procrastination happens precisely because you care too much about being judged, about failing publicly, about not measuring up to some invisible standard you set for yourself. Ancient humans didn't need to manage that kind of abstract self-judgment. Their fears were concrete. Yours are often invisible, which makes them far harder to outrun. And yet the pattern rewards itself in a strange, self-reinforcing loop. You avoid the task. The anxious feeling drops. Your brain quietly notes that avoidance worked. So next time the feeling rises, it reaches for the same solution even faster. Weeks later, you're not procrastinating on one task anymore. You're procrastinating on your entire relationship with discomfort. Here's the modern mirror, and it might be the strangest part of all. You live in an environment engineered, almost perfectly, to exploit this exact vulnerability. Every app on your phone is built by people who understand hyperbolic discounting intimately, sometimes better than psychologists do. A notification offers a tiny reward right now, guaranteed. The task you're avoiding offers a reward later, uncertain, and wrapped in effort. Your ancient brain will pick the notification every single time, not because you're weak, but because the entire architecture of the modern world is optimized to trigger the same reflex that once helped a forager decide between 2 ripe berries and 1 unripe one. So what actually helps? Not more guilt. Guilt adds another negative emotion to a task that already produces too many. Sirois' research suggests the opposite approach works better, treating yourself with the same patience you'd offer a friend who was struggling, which lowers the emotional charge enough that avoidance stops feeling necessary. Pychyl's research points towards simply starting, not finishing, just beginning for 2 minutes. Because the anticipatory dread is almost always worse than the task itself once you're inside it. And Mischel's children remind you that changing how a moment feels works better than trying to will your way through it. None of this requires becoming a different person. It requires understanding that the version of you who avoids things isn't broken. It's ancient. It's running code that kept human beings alive for 100,000 years, misapplied to a world of inboxes and deadlines that no hunter-gatherer ever had to face. So tonight, when you sit down in front of that same task again, notice the moment right before you look away. That flicker isn't weakness. It's a threat signal, inherited, automatic, older than language itself. You don't have to obey it. You just have to recognize it for what it actually is. Because the task sitting in the back of your mind was never about laziness at all. It was about a feeling you inherited from ancestors who never once had to open a laptop. And somehow, that feeling still runs the show.